Hey, everybody, welcome. Today we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we are here today, and Jessyka's been with us the whole time. So I really appreciate all her patience, and she just really wants to share with you guys, and I'm super excited about that because we're talking about study skills today. Specifically, we're talking about the 12 study skills and the specific 12 study skills that help us teach our kids how to learn. These kids need to know how to learn, right? It's not just, we can't just put stuff in front of them and expect them just to whoo. I mean, sometimes they do, especially, but if they've had some box checking, right? You guys know about the box checking. They've had some box checking. They might have really not been able to pursue that natural just absorption, that energy and stuff like that that they already know. And two, when stuff gets a little harder, like with teens that Jessyka works with, then we have to kind of learn some things to help us learn and also to help us just absorb and also process and critically think through the information that we're getting. So I love this. We talked about critical thinking last week when we were on with Who Smarted Jerry Colbert, the Who Smarted podcast, and that was so much fun. And so really this is about how do you take the information that they're getting and how do you help them process it and critically think and then work through the hard stuff, man, because learning is hard, right? Change is hard, learning is hard. We're expanding those neural pathways and we're really, really engaging. And sometimes that can be a little bit tough. So Jessyka's an expert at that. And I'm super excited because she is all about teaching kids to love to learn too, because when it's easier, they like it more, right? So, and that's my jam. We are on the same page right there, and I am loving that. So, Jessyka, can you please tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you love so much about tutoring and study skills?
Definitely. You're right, Cami. We are totally on the same wavelength. So it's like, yes, when I realized you were going to talk about Love to Learn at my event, that's actually happening today, thanks to you and amazing other speakers. But yes, it's all about Love to Learn. It's all about helping teens learn how to learn through study skills so they can actually learn. Because like you're saying, yes, when our teens, our kids, when they actually know what they're learning, then yeah, they actually enjoy this whole school, this whole learning thing. But yet when they hit a certain class, a subject, maybe a teacher for our public school kiddos, it's a matter of, oh, like how does this work? And they think it's something to do with them. They think maybe I'm just not a math kid. They think maybe I'm never going to be able to learn that. And it's like, no, it's not that you can't. It's just you maybe don't have the skills you need to actually learn the material. So that's when the study skills come in.
I love that. I love that. And, I love that you were both on the really trying to increase that natural love of learning and trying to bring that back and really support it because that's something the skills that you're teaching are really bringing them into lifelong learning so that they understand that, hey, I love that you said that. It's not about them. They're total geniuses. They just need to have the tools, right? And the tools to be able to do that. So, I love that we're talking about this because it is something that I love to do and I kind of geek out on as an a former English teacher in public school. And it's something that my son teaches, teach my son all the time when homeschooling. We talk about a lot about note taking, especially. And I know that's one of your skills, but I want to first talk about why do you think we need them for learning success? Like, why do you need, we're going to talk about what the skills are, you guys, in just a second. Jessyka's going to cover all that. But why do you think we need them? What does it have to do with loving learning?
Oh, I mean, to me, Cami, this kind of goes down to what does a tutor actually do? And I got to tell you, all of our listeners probably think of like a math tutor. They talk, like you said, English. So, like when you assign a paper, there's a lot of kids I've helped with their papers. And so, a lot of times, parents think, okay, she's going to help with a certain class, a certain subject. She's going to help with homework. And the thing is, I did that. Like, I've been a tutor for what, nearly 10 years now. And the first several years, yeah, I was helping middle schoolers through high school and college kiddos with different classes. But then they would show up without notes. They would not have any idea when the next test is. They had no idea why we were doing that homework assignment. And so I realized, okay, I'm helping them very short term. I'm giving them kind of that quick win for this project, this semester, but yet they're going to have this exact same problem maybe in another class like 2 years from now. Or it could even just be like next fall, like the next time I could see them, just because they're missing the skills. So I literally went home and I thought about, okay, you talk about being a nerd, being a geek. I was valedictorian in my high school class. So I was like, okay, what are those skills that I used to do so well, to learn as much as I did, to get those grades that I wanted? And I literally made a list and I was like, oh, these are study skills. And oh, every single teen I'm currently working with right now, let alone everyone I remember working with before, they're missing at least one of these. And so that's why I transitioned, and that kind of answers your question of why they're so needed for success is the fact that they're so much more important. They're not the band-aid like content tutoring is. They're actually going to build that foundation. They're going to actually teach the how to learn so that can apply to any class, any learning in or out of school.
Yeah, I love that you talked about the fact that they're not just actual like note taking, or it's not just that your skills and the way that you teach them actually go beyond that into your thinking and into what you are as a person, really, which is amazing. I love that. And it's not just, and it's stuff you already did before, like what that reflection is so key. But then also, it's like, who did I become in the process to be able to do all these things? Because that's really what we're talking about as far as lifelong learning, you guys. Lifelong learning is about who you become in the process so that we can go out in the world and make the change in the world that we see is a need that we can fill. Right. And so I love that you already did that. That makes you a huge leader and in the 1% of the population, a top 1%. Absolutely. And so I really want to get into, because I know we're going to spend a lot of time on this, the 12 study skills, because this is something I feel like is not covered by most tutors. Like you said, there's mostly just a lot of like, okay, let me teach you how to do this math problem, this one math skill. And yours is more is it starts with skills, like practical skills, and then it expands to higher level thinking. And I love that. So can you just share with us a little bit about some of those 12 skills and just what the heck why do we need those?
Definitely. And I mean, I will be 100% honest, Cami. I have parents that come to me and their kids need help with a class. And so what I've discovered is it's like, okay, we can definitely help with that class, but I make sure they know, that's not the real problem here. And so we dig in and figure out, yeah, which of these skills is missing. And I do my absolute best. I mean, obviously I'm not going to force them to buy the My Love to Learn program, right? Like but it's a matter of I like to have one lesson for study skills and one lesson for the content, because we've got to sometimes catch up in that content before that we can use these skills going forward. But the 12 skills, so I know you've got them and they are taught in a very certain order. So we can talk about that if you like. But I always start with note taking, then we go into annotating, and then kind of how to use those learning styles to create that perfect study session. From there, it's all about retaining information. And then the ones I know lots of our listeners are probably going to go, does she teach? And I do. Organization and time management. Those are big needs. And goal setting, motivation, confidence, self-advocacy, grit, and resilience. So a lot of them in there. And I think I might have missed soft skills, but lots of variety in there.
Yeah, I love that you really go beyond the page, go beyond the book, go beyond whatever the lesson is, and really teach about, I mean, organization, time management, goal setting. This is all the stuff that my son is going through right now in terms of he's initiated that he feels the need for it. He understands that if I'm going to be a lifelong learner, if I'm going to be dedicated to my studies and I'm going to own it, then I have to have time management. I have to have organization. I have to have my priorities in line. I mean, he's still 15. We're working on that. But it is really about, how do I set goals and how do I make a plan to achieve them? Those are huge. Those are huge. So, one thing I love to teach as an English teacher is definitely annotation, that I feel like that's such a huge skill that most people don't understand. I'm teaching a leadership class right now to teenagers, and I told them, okay, we're going to write in the books. And they're like,
Uh-huh. Yep.
right? Isn't that amazing when they could do that, when they could write in the book? And why do you feel like that's so important?
I gotta tell you, to me, it always comes down to learning style. So for me, when you say annotating, I think about colors because I'm a very visual learner. And so that's something I'm actually working on with a teen right now, is he kind of did exactly what you did. Like, what do you mean? Why would I write in the book? Because I've got some kids who are like, why would you ruin it? And then I've got some teens I work with that are like, it gets too much, like it's too overwhelming. And so we always bare minimum, kind of my three must annotate things are questions, vocab words, and formulas. Like those are the must things they've got to. But for me, other than that, it's like the auditory learners are probably the hardest ones to kind of annotate. For them, it's very much I have them kind of have to decide why are you annotating, like kind of talk through it. I'm
Absolutely.
confused because, and then my kinesthetic learners very much need to annotate. We haven't even talked about sticky notes. That's a whole another form of annotating, but yet it's still annotating.
And dog earing the page.
Yeah,
Don't do it.
I do that
It's
all the time. Yes.
blasphemy, right? I know, I do that all the time too. And it's something that the kids need to understand that it's a discussion. You're having a discussion. We talk about discussion is where meaning happens and whether that be it could be in any subject, right? But that's a discussion that you're having with the author. The author's having with you. And that is really getting some meaning and some learning happening. Plus, when you have a discussion with somebody else about it, where's that one quote? Where's that one formula? Where's that one thing? I don't really remember. Oh, yes. I wrote a little note there about that, right? I
Exactly.
love that. I love that. So tell me about what creating the perfect study session would look like. Like I don't even what does that look like for you? I imagine it's different for every personality style like you were talking about. But what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I teach teens is we start with where are they studying, like the environment. Like that seems like a really simple thing, but I gotta tell you, like when you talk about you having a 15-year-old, a lot of teens I work with, they do homework, they study in their beds. And I'm like, how many times do you fall asleep? And they're like, a lot. And I was like, well, it's because your bed is kind of for sleep and your brain knows that. So if you're in your bed, your brain's not going, ooh, let's learn this, let's do this work. It's thinking, hey, you're in bed, let's go to sleep. And so that to me is kind of step number one. And yeah, you're right. It looks very different for different learning styles because we talk about, well, what is in that area that's going to be distraction. Is it going to be the people walking by? Like my visual learners, I don't want them by windows because I had one kiddo, she would count the cars. She could tell you after the 20-minute study session, yeah, 10 cars went by, two of them were blue, it was a big truck. And I was like, well, what homework did you do? Oh, I don't know what class I was working on. I was watching the cars. And so they literally moved her from the window to more of the center of the room, like literally the other side of the table. And all of a sudden, homework started getting done. And she's like, that's it. And I was like, yeah, we just have to get you in the right environment. Like, that's literally like one of the first steps.
I love that. That is so true. My son used to do that all the time. He stare out the window and just like, I mean,
Mhm.
at the wall, at the anything. And I remember I was teaching, when I was teaching high school, there was a teacher in my school who was teaching, he had been teaching there for like a long time. Let's just say it was a long time. It was in the early 2000s and he had been teaching there since 1968.
Wow.
And so he was his whole room was filled with boxes of copies of things that, because back when we had to make copies of everything he ever had. I mean, just floor to ceiling, like floor, it just stacks and stacks of boxes and posters and things. I mean, there was no wall space, and it was overwhelming for me to be in his classroom. It was just, ah. And that's like when we sit down and we're trying to accomplish something and there's a lot of clutter around or there's dishes in the sink and you're like, oh, that that's there and you can't ignore it. I love that. I love that. What about organization? Like, how do you teach kids a little bit about organization?
Yeah. So this to me always comes down to two parts. And I imagine, Kimmy, if you think about it, you could probably tell me the two parts because once I explain to teens, it's like it's the mental side and the physical side. I've noticed that that actually also is kind of a natural break. And did never actually teach it that way, coming out to say physical versus mental. But until I had a student and he's like, I'm really good at getting stuff to and from school, but I never know when anything's due. Like I never know when I'm supposed to be doing what. And that was like the perfect example because I talk about, okay, in this day and age, especially our kids are going to any type of, if it's to schooling or the co-op, whatever it is, it's like, do you have your laptop? Do you have the cords and all the stuff you need for that? Let alone, yeah, are you taking the right assignment on the right day? Let alone, yeah, when is that test? When do you have to give that presentation? two very, very different types. So that's where we start is getting them physically organized. So what goes where? My biggest kind of teaching point on that is everything has one home and one home only. And I gotta tell you, Cami, I wish every teen out there had a homework folder because I cannot tell you how many teens don't use folders, let alone on the computer, let alone physical ones. And then I'm like, well, where do you keep your homework? Well, I keep it in the class folder. That's just I hate that. We could talk about that the whole time, Cami, why the homework folder is so important. And then with the mental side, it's all about the routines. And so one of my biggest things, I
Yes.
guess, again, wish all teens had was a dedicated homework time. No matter if we're talking homeschoolers, brick and mortar, it's like you got to know when you're doing that work, when you're actually sitting down to do that thing called study.
Yeah, the routines are so huge. And I talk about that a lot with homeschoolers. You guys know I talk about routines a lot and having together times, independent times, and then everybody has the same expectation about what's happening when. That's very, very, very important. And so you don't have to be so box checking in the delineation of what that time is for, but you do in terms of the like, okay, page this, page that, but you do have to have an expectation of what we're doing now.
Mhm.
So that's very important. And having routines is really helpful for kids because they thrive on routines. They really do because it's like, okay, now I know what we're doing next. And especially if you have neurodivergent kids and ADHD kids, that's like super huge for having the routines is so, so important. I love that. And so one of the things that I know parents talk about a lot, especially with homeschooling, is motivation. And that's so huge. I know that's something that I talk about a lot and I teach about a lot. And I coach a lot of people on how to, like, my teen doesn't care about anything, hates school, whatever. First of all, that's a love of learning problem. And Jessica and I
Yes.
know that, right?
Yes.
But how do you address the motivation problem?
Yeah, and you're right. That question comes up a lot when I let mamas into my Facebook group. Yeah, motivation, confidence, time management, those are pretty much the three things I see 99% of the time. Yes. And with motivation, the most important thing, especially when we're talking middle schoolers, and especially as we get closer and closer to high school graduation and beyond, is we've got to think about the internal motivation. Like so many parents think that, okay, I have to remind, I have to be, sitting next to him to make sure he gets it done. Okay, I have to buy this, I should do this. It's like, no, 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 no. The whole point is, why is your teen doing that thing? Like, what's in it for your teen? And I know that's what's so cool about the work that you do, Cami, is it's very much okay. We're inspiring that love of learning and we're letting them run with it. I mean, that's the coolest thing. But the thing a lot of teens don't realize, especially those that I work with, if they're mostly, kind of public school, is okay, this is a homework assignment. And then, this is all I'm supposed to learn, all I get to learn. And it's like, how can that interest tie into everything else that you're doing? Even if it has absolutely nothing to do with that class. Okay, well, if you can use that interest and it ties in, use that. There's some motivation right there. And there's also the whole idea of what would that teen rather be doing? Because the way I teach motivation is very much through reward systems. And I know sometimes I say that and parents like, what? No, 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 I don't want to buy stuff. And it's like, no, it's more like an after then system. I used to call it an if then system. It was actually another speaker at another event that's like, well, if you call it an if then system, well, it's like if they do it. But if we call it an after then, well, that means they only get it after. And that's such a better way of saying it. So it's literally they do this thing, then they get this thing. So we walk through and figure out what are those things, and then we have to figure out how do they match to the things that they're doing. Because when I tell parents, yeah, your kids need to take breaks, like they should not be sitting down there doing homework and studying and learning for hours on end. Like there need to be breaks like every 20, 30 minutes, hour max. They're like, breaks are bad, like they're going to get distracted. And it's like, well, there's a big difference between your kid spends 5 minutes on one question and then takes an hour break versus your child just worked for an hour and takes a 5 minute break. That looks very different. So it's all about how we're motivating, and is it the teen that's actually choosing that thing? That's the motivator, because parents, that's not their job. Not their job to motivate their kiddos at all.
And I love how you talk about the internal motivation there because if love of learning is high, right, everything is easier. If love of learning is low, everything is harder. And so I love that you also put in their interests as well. So we're tying it in whenever we can to their interests. And homeschoolers, we get to do that a lot. And that's something that we love to do. And it's something that if we focus just on that, they're not going to learn any like important things. That's the thinking problem, right? Is separating those two. We can actually we need to combine them because that's where our motivation motivation exists. I know I didn't want to learn about audio editing when I started a podcast, but I that was something that I wanted to start a podcast, so I had to learn about it. So I was motivated to learn it, right? And
Mhm.
that's something that is my son's really interested in AI and coding and things like that. And he didn't want to learn Python code, but he wanted to create a software. And so that is something that he really was motivated to do, right? I absolutely love that. And I also having the caveat of saying like be careful of what you reward and be careful of what you allow to reward because sometimes the rewards can be they can counteract what we're doing and really lead to lower level of learning. And so I love that you said that it comes from them because having them really, but having it come from them with motivation or with mentoring. So
Yes.
that's huge. I absolutely love that. And that builds confidence, right? Because when they can do that and they do it over and over again and they're like, oh, wait, here we're doing it. We got confidence, right? I love that. And one of the things that I love that you wrote in your study skills here is the self-advocacy. And so I love that. Can you share a little bit about that? Because that's something I feel that isn't I mean, we don't have a lot of that going on with teens in society. And and I feel like it's not real self-advocacy. It's a more like pressure. And so what do you think that is? And how do kids advocate for themselves?
You're picking out some good study skills, Cami, because yeah, we could be here forever talking about these. And I giggle, to me, the most important study skill, we haven't ever come out and said it, is note taking. And that to me is because we've got to have note taking in order to use all these other skills. Because we were
Right.
talking about organization and the routines. How are you going to write out that routine if we don't know how to take notes? And then we're talking about self advocacy. Well, one of those ways to self advocate is to send an email because that's what I do with my teens in my program is I give them, well, what are we advocating for? We talk about how to do it. And then we talk about, okay, how does your learning style tie in? And so I've got kiddos that they're too shy, they're too embarrassed, they're too worried about raising their hands in class. But then I've got other students that are like, yeah, I'm gonna like just come out. If I got a question, I'm gonna ask it now. And we talk about, okay, how does that help you? How does it help everyone else? Because I mean, you were just talking like siblings, if we're talking homeschooling, okay, especially if they're close in age or if they're going to go through the same curriculum eventually. Okay, well, maybe your kid reads that and then your other kid reads it and goes, well, that's confusing too. Well, now that everybody knows what the answer is or we've worked through it together, even with the class or like I said, siblings, it's going to help. So, I mean, that's part of it is really figuring out what does it look like? Is it asking a question? Is it sending an email? Is it meeting with the teacher? Because I mean, like you said, with routines and knowing what are we doing, independent versus kind of group, it's the same thing. It's like, do I wait for this question to get the help? Or I work with some teens like on a test. They will waste like 20 minutes because they spend that whole 20 minutes trying to figure out this question. It's like, why don't you skip it? Or why don't you ask the teacher? Why don't, if you're allowed to use your notes, your formula sheet, whatever resources in the room, use that. So I mean, that's part of it is just knowing how we're doing this and then making sure we don't wait. That's the thing that kills me, especially as a tutor, is I cannot tell you how many families I've already met with over the summer, these first couple of weeks of school, this first month of school, and been told, oh, we're going to wait till January. And especially with my freshmen, I'm like, you realize their GPA like matters big time now. And if things aren't going well now, and they didn't go well last year, they're not going to get any better unless your team just kind of happens to figure it out, which can happen. But that's where the self advocacy piece comes in. It's like you're here, you're advocating for your kiddo. Now let your kid advocate for what he or she needs
And I feel like that goes for the parents more
to.
too, because we have to advocate for our kids, right? And so we generally do that, but trying to find the little things here and there that like, well, I'll just research it myself. I'll just try this. I'll just try that. Rather than, and I've had coaches and mentors in every area of my life for my entire life, and and Jess probably says the same thing, right? Is that we reaching out to people and doing that right away and not wasting the time, right? I know from personal experience because I did there wasn't homeschool mentors back then. So when I first started homeschooling, so it was really hard and I had to go through all of that trial and error, but you don't have to do that anymore. And I did reach out to the places where I could, to gather that information. So I love that you're saying that. And I love that we came back around to the top to note taking because that is the key. You guys, literally told my leadership development students last the the first week, I was like, okay, we have a notebook every single week, and we're going to take notes on what each other is saying. We're going to take notes on, we're going to annotate the book. We're going to take notes on the discussion, and we're going to practice this. And we actually taught note taking because that is something I tell my son. He doesn't, of course, he doesn't really like it. He's like, oh, this is kind of a pain. I'm like, this is something you use every single day. I have taken notes every day for my entire life. Like there are very few days where I'm not note taking, right? I mean, it's a skill that we use all the time. I love that. I love it. I love it. And then, of course, getting through the hard stuff, that grit is super huge. I love that. So, can you tell us a little bit about like, so what does somebody that has all of these skills, what kind of a kid like, what do they look like? What is their mode of operandus?
I mean, I gotta tell you, I've worked with a lot of kiddos that have been kicked out of school due to behavior issues, due to just a lack of kind of caring about school at all. And I've had kids go from kind of that extreme, even my kids, like we talked about earlier, with, they're neurodivergent. I mean, the thing is, these study skills apply to everybody. Doesn't matter if I'm talking about a sixth grader, seventh grader, high school, senior, college, sophomore, anything in anywhere. Let alone how they learn. The answer is they're going to go from struggling to going, oh, this is how I do this. Like the whole purpose of it is to have a kid not think, I don't know how to learn, to stop them from thinking, I don't know how to study, because that takes a lot. Like I make sure that every teen I work with that, it's like it takes a lot for you to admit that, to really realize that, and then to take them from, oh, this is how I personalize my learning. Like I never want anyone, no matter if we're talking they're at work, we're talking to a parent, like they're just doing something, the hobby, like you said, your son learning Python, it's like we can learn that so many different ways, but only one way is interesting to us. Only one way actually works. One way comes naturally, which is why I'm all about the learning styles. So, short answer, Cami, just would have been kids are actually going to like learning. Like they're going to actually want to learn, and they're not going to feel like they have to learn. They're going to be excited to learn whatever, whenever, doesn't matter why they're learning, if they're being forced to or because they're choosing to.
Yeah, and that's such a great way to get these kids to become lifelong learners, you guys. Just gonna get on the same page because when they have this, it's all about that love to learn. If they love to learn and they have the confidence, they know they can learn and they have skills to learn, they know how to learn and how to look for resources.
Yes.
It doesn't, it I almost doesn't matter what they learn during during their formative years. They can learn whenever they need to. So if they need to learn, the quadratic formula later, they can learn it if they didn't learn it already. They might have to relearn it, like the rest of us. But that's something that is so huge. I always taught my kids that if they just loved, if they found one book that they like to read, I don't even care what it's about. I do kind of care, but I want it to be appropriate. But if not, I mean, as long as your parents approve it, it's fine. But then once they find that, maybe, just maybe, they'll read something someday. Then maybe they'll write something someday. Maybe they'll transform. Maybe they'll become readers. That's huge. That's
Mhm.
what I taught in public school. And with homeschooling, we can do so much more than that, which is amazing. Jessyka, I love what you do. I feel like you should be the study skills coach, not not that because you're not just a tutor. And I absolutely love that. Although you do that stuff too. But really, really, this is the message that you're sending. And I absolutely love that. You guys, we have an event going on right now, and I want Jessyka to talk about this real quick because it's so fun and I loved participating in it. She runs an amazing event. There's some awesome speakers. And so, Jessyka, tell us a little bit about that event that's happening right now.
Definitely. So it's called Fall into High School and Beyond. And it's from September 23rd to the 29th. So I know we're not at the beginning anymore, but yet your interview is available today for 24 hours, let alone a whole bunch of other interviews coming up. So I mean, we've got a nice wide variety of topics, and it is literally designed for mamas of teens. Obviously, dads are welcome too, but literally parents, guardians of middle schoolers, high schoolers, and college kiddos. Like that was who the event is made for. It's all about back to school. It's all about how can we start the school year off on the right foot and actually empower teens to learn beyond today. Because you and I, we've been talking about lifelong learning, love of learning, and that's the whole thing. Is the whole point of every event I do is to help the mamas and help them realize, okay, it's not just the study skills. It's just not this culture of learning it at home that I know you teach. It's literally all these other things that you don't realize have anything to do with learning. But yet your kid can have these study skills. But yet if there's this other problem going on between your teen, where your teen has this diagnosis or this thing happened at school, like all these things literally lead into possibly a great impact, a positive or not so great impact. So that's the whole point of the event is 30 speakers, 7 days, totally free, lots of free, awesome resources. And then the cool thing is too, I don't know if your mamas know this, I don't know, Cami, if you knew this, but this is the first event I've ever offered those golden teen tips. So those of our listeners who want to upgrade and do the whole gold VIP pass, then there's kind of like an event for your teens as well. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and those are some great messages for your teens that they can listen to themselves, directed specifically to them, which is so cool. Awesome, you guys. I am going to post the link in the for that event in everywhere this is showing and everywhere it's playing. So make sure you grab your free ticket. It's only halfway over, and if you get the VIP pass, then you can get the replays and everything like that too. So it's super amazing, you guys, and grab the freebies. They're super awesome. And I am so grateful for Jessyka for putting this on. And I've been in other events before that are not as well run as Jessyka's event. So I really appreciate all her efforts. I know it takes a lot to put these things together, and it is truly benefiting the entire community. So I really appreciate that. Thanks so much, Jessyka, for joining us today. And we will talk to you guys again next week. Bye-bye.